Page 385, Novel. Robert Graves, Graves, is remembered for his historical novels. Claudius, 1934, Count Belisarius, 1938, Wife to Mr. Milton, 1943, and The Golden Fleece, 1944. Christopher Isherwood, the poet-playwright, wrote Mr. Norris Changes Train, 1935, and Goodbye to Berlin in a comic vein. Richard Hughes is remembered for A High Wind in Jamaica, 1929, The Fox in the Attic, 1961, and The Wooden Shepherdess, 1973. Graham Greene, 1904-91, is the most outstanding novelist after the Second World War. His novels are The Man Within, 1929, It's a Battlefield, 1934, England Med Me, 1935, Brighton Rock, 1938, The Power and the Glory, 1940, The Heart of the Matter, 1948, The End of the Affair, 1951, The Quiet American, 1955, A Burnt Out Case, 1961, The Comedians, 1966, Travels with My Aunt, 1969, and The Human Factor, 1978, and Monsignor, Monsignor, Quixote, Quixote, 1982. Greene's main concern is with evil and its endless conflict with righteousness. His main concern is with sin and damnation, and restoration in contemporary society. He depicts fundamental evil and fundamental good in his novels. Greene's conversion to Catholicism in 1927 determined the character of his best work. Evelyn Waugh, W-A-U-G-H, 1903-1966, an outstanding satirist, castigated a world which had no values except the need to make money and have fun. His early novels, Decline and Fall, 1928, Vile Bodies, 1930, A Black Mischief, 1932, A Handful of Dust, 1934, Scoop, 1938, and Put Out More Flags, 1942, are famous and vigorous satires. The Loved One, 1948, is a hitter farcical satire on American funeral customs and the double-facedness of the affluent American society. His later novels, Brideshead Revisited, 1945, The Loved One, 1948, Sword of Honor Trilogy, Men or Arms, 1952, Officers and Gentlemen, 1955, Unconditional Surrender, 1961, and Basil Seal Rides Again, 1963, show signs of maturity. The general note is still that of sardonic satire, but there is a feeling of seriousness for the loss of ideas and values in the post-war world. Waugh, too, was a Roman Catholic, and his novels have religious implications. Henry Green, 1905-1973, wrote Blindness, 1926, Party Going, 1939, Caught, C-A-U-G-H-T, 1943, Loving, 1945, Back, 1946, Concluding, 1948, Nothing, 1950, and Doting, 1952. His knowledge of human nature, his limitless wit, and his technical skill give his novels a rare distinction. George Orwell, 1903-1950, judges the social system from a different angle in his novels. Burmese Days, 1934, A Clergyman's Daughter, 1935, The Road to Veganpire, 1937, and his masterpiece Animal Farm, 1945. He believed in socialism, and his novels show his discontent with contemporary society and his depression at the horrid visions of future. Disillusioned with communism after fighting in Spain, he wrote Animal Farm, a political satire on a totalitarian state in which all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. It is written in an incisive and witty style. 1984-1949 is, quote, a terrifying prognostication of the hatred, cruelty, fear, loss of individuality, and lack of love that future would bring, stop, unquote. His pseudonym was Eric Blair, Blair, stop, para. Sir Charles Percy Snow, 1905-80, a Cambridge University scientist and civil servant, followed the tradition of novel as a social history. He had access to material denied to many novelists, and he fully utilized it. He presents a vivid picture of society from the 1920s onward through his hero, Lewis Eliot, the narrator of a whole series of novels. His well-known novels are Strangers and Brothers, 1940, The Light and the Dark, 1947, Time of Hope, 1949, The Masters, 1951, The New Man, 1954, The Affair, 1960, The Conscience of the Rich, 1958, Corridors of Power, 1963, The Sleep of Reason, 1968, and The Last Refuge, 1970. Para. Joyce Carey, Cary, 1888-1957, brilliantly combined comedy, even farce, with the pathetic and the mockingly beautiful in his novels Mr. Johnson, 1939, The Horse's Mouth, 1944, Prisoner of Grace, 1952, Except the Lord, 1953, and Not Honor More, 1955. Para. Anthony Powell, Powell, 1905-, wrote in a witty and epigrammatic style about the peculiarities and snobberies of the upper middle class in Afternoon Men, 1931, A Question of Upbringing, 1951, A Buyer's Market, 1952, The Acceptance World, 1955, As Lady Molly, 1957, and Casanova's Chinese Restaurant, 1960. Rex Werner, 1905-1986, wrote The Wild Goose Chase, 1937, The Professor, 1938, and The Aerodrome, 1941. Para. William Golding, 1911-1993, a major novelist of contemporary period, was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1983, page 386. His famous novels are The Lord of Flies, 1954, Inheritors, 1955, Pincher Martin, 1956, Free Fall, 1959, The Spirit, 1960, The Pyramid, 1967, Rites of Passage, 1980, and The Paper Man, 1984. Golding belonged, quote, to the genre of the philosophical epilogue rather than the novel as a social history. The central theme of his novels is the problem of evil and its threats to individual and social existence, stop, unquote. His masterpiece, The Lord of Flies, stresses with horrifying persuasiveness the emergence of destructiveness in a group of well-bred English boys marooned on a tropical island during the Atomic War. The Inheritor shows how a few survivors of a primitive race are destroyed by a more civilized but more successfully destructive people. Golding's tone and manner are classical. Para. Lionel Poles Hartley, Hartley, 1895 to 1972, a fine craftsman, wrote of, quote, denaturized humanity, characterized by a sense of loneliness in his famous novels. No unquote mark. The Go-Between 1953, The Hireling Hirelling 1957, The Betrayed 1966, and The Harness Room 1971. Para. H. E. Bates, Bates, 1905 to 74, wrote novels and short stories about country folk in How Sleep and Brave 1941, The Wedding Party 1965, The Four Beauties, The Four Beauties, The Darling, Darling, Buds of May 1958, and When the Green Woods Laugh 1960. His rural settings are authentic and are fully integrated with the moods of characters. His Jacaranda Tree 1949 is a novel about India and Myanmar. Para. John Masters came of a family that had always served in India with the army. After a distinguished military career, he wrote many novels dealing with different moments in Indian history. His famous novels are The Night Runners of Bengal, 1951, Bhavani Junction, 1954, and Fandango Rock, 1959. His sympathetic understanding of the professional soldier in the Field Marshal's memoirs. Para. Lawrence Durrell, Durrell, 1912 to 90, was a romantic who wrote Justin, 1957, Balthazar, 1958, and Mount Olive, 1958. These novels are known as the Alexandrian Quartet. Para. Angus Frank Johnston Wilson, 1913 to 91, a satirist, deals with misfeats and neurotics of middle classes in The Wrong Set, 1949. Such Darling Dodos, 1950, Hemlock and After, 1952, The Old Man at the Zoo, 1961, and The Late Cell, 1964. Para. Paul Scott, 1920 to 78, was in army service during the World War II in India and Malay. Before devoting his time to literature, he was a publisher and then a literary agent. His main novels are The Bird of Paradise, 1962, The Bender, 1963, The Day of the Scorpion, 1968, The Raj Quartet, 1966 to 75, The Towers of Silence and the Division of the Spoils. His masterpiece, The Raj Quartet, and other novels are realistic and are set in India and Malay. The Raj Quartet comprises 4 novels: The Jewel in the Crown, The Day of the Scorpion, The Towers of Silence, and The Division of Spoils. It spans last 5 years, 1942 to 47, of the British Empire in India. It consists of multiple viewpoints which are expressed in complex, fragmentary structure, the technique he learned from Conrad. These viewpoints range from the ostracized Anglo-Indian Hari Kumar to the satiristic disciplinarian Ronald Merrick, Merrick. Para. Kingsley Amis, 1922 to 95, is remembered for his famous novels Lucky Jim, 1954, Take a Girl Like You, 1960, The Anti-Death League, 1966, and The Old Devil, 1986. He wrote with extravagant humor rather than indignation about the frustrations of the overeducated but socially underprivileged. He was the foremost comic novelist of his generation. Para. John Wayne wrote Hurry on Dawn, 1953, The Contenders, 1958, A Traveling Woman, 1959, Strike the Father Dead, 1962, The Young Visitors, 1965, The Pardoner's Tale, 1968, and Young Shoulders, 1982. His novels give us a sense of actual contemporary life. His observation of life is often distorted by his moral convictions. In these novels he drew a carefully considered portrait of the angry young man. Para. Anthony Burgess, Burgess, 1917–93, has written entertaining novels which cover a very wide area. The Malayan Trilogy, 1956–59, shows the influence of E. M. Forster's A Passage to India. Like James Joyce, he explored the possibilities of language in his novels. A Clockwork Orange, 1962, Tremor of Intent, 1966, and Earthly Powers, 1980. A Clockwise Orange is narrated by Alex, who indulges in cruelty and takes pleasure in causing pain and unhappiness to others. Earthly Powers is narrated by octogenarian Kenneth Toomey, Toomey. Para. Iris Murdoch, 1919–99, blends wheat, eroticism, fantasy, and symbolism in her novels. Under the Net, 1954, gives an interesting picture of angry young men rushing after affluence and seeking truth where no truth exists. The Sandcastle, 1957, and The Bell, 1958, are tightly constructed studies of human relationships. Page 387. A Severed Head, 1961, seems to be a modern comedy of erotic manners. Sex and sexual symbolism are freely used in An Unofficial Rose, 1962, The Unicorn, 1963, An Accidental Man, 1971, The Black Prince, 1973, and The Sacred and Profane Love Machine, 1974. Para. Alan Silbito, Silbitoe, 1920, is an eloquent spokesman of contemporary English working class. His novels Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, 1958, The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner, 1959, The Death of William Posters, 1966, A Start in Life, 1970, and The Widower's Son, 1976. Para. William Cooper may be considered as the originator of the angry young man who revolts against the system which has nurtured him in Scenes from Provincial Life, 1950, and Scenes from Married Life, 1961. Progress and tradition in the bourgeois world are the theme of the ever-interesting Topic, 1953, Memoirs of a New Man, 1966, Love on the Coast, 1973, and You Aren't Alone, 1976. Para. Some of the memorable novels of the 20th century are Alan Stewart Patton's Cry, Paton*s*Cry, Cry, The Beloved Country, 1948, Doris Lessing's The Grass is Singing, 1950, A Proper Marriage, 1954, The Rifle from the Storm, 1958, The Golden Notebook, 1962, The Story of a Non-Marrying Man, 1972, and The Memoirs of a Survivor, 1975. Edna O'Brien's The Country Girls, 1960, The Lonely Girl, 1962, and Girls in Their Married Bliss, 1964. Nigel Dennis's Cards of Identity, 1965. John Jared Bryan's Room at the Top, 1962. Muriel Sparks' The Comforters, 1957. The Driver's Seat, 1970. Not to Disturb, 1971. And The Abbeys of Crewe, CREWE, 1974. Barbara Pism's PISM apostrophe-S, 1913-80, Some Tame Gazelle, GAZELLE, 1950, Excellent Women, 1952, Jane and Prudence, 1953, and A Glass of Blessings, 1958. Angela Carter's 1942-92, The Passion of New Eve, 1977, Fireworks, 1974, and Bloody Chamber, 1979. Margaret Drabble, DRABBLE apostrophe-S, A Summer Bird Cage, 1963, and Jerusalem the Golden, 1967. Sean O'Faullain's O apostrophe capital F small AOLAIN apostrophe-S, 1900-91, A Nest of Simple Folk, 1933, Bird Alone, 1936, and Come Back to Irene, 1940. And David Story's STOREY apostrophe-S, 1933 The Sporting Life, 1960, Radcliffe, 1963, Passmore, 1973, A Prodigal Child, 1982, and Present Times, 1985. Stop.